Blood soaks through her dress as she collapses against the desert rock. The doctor reaches to help, and she flinches back, terror in her eyes. "I can't let you touch me there," she whispers. "Please, I can't." He sees the bruises, the scars, the fear that lives deeper than any bullet wound. And in that moment, Samuel Garrett makes a choice that will change both their lives forever. But first, let me take you back to where it all began. The desert doesn't forgive mistakes. Samuel Garrett had learned that truth 15 years ago, the day he buried his wife and daughter in soil so dry it barely held their graves. Now watching the sun bleed across the Arizona sky in shades of copper and rust, he wondered if the land ever tired of teaching the same lesson over and over again. The sound came just as twilight settled over Red Rock Canyon, a gunshot distant but unmistakable, echoing off the ancient stone walls that surrounded his small medical outpost. Samuel paused, his hand hovering over the surgical instruments he'd been cleaning. Another shot followed, then a third, each one closer than the last. He'd stopped running toward trouble years ago, stopped trying to save people who probably didn't want saving. But old habits, especially the ones carved into a man during war, died harder than the men who'd learned them. Samuel dried his hands on a clean cloth and reached for the rifle that hung above his examination table. It was loaded. It was always loaded. The last light of day painted long shadows across the canyon floor as Samuel stepped outside. The air still held the day's heat, that peculiar warmth of desert evenings that made a man's shirt stick to his back even as the temperature dropped. He could smell creosote and dust, the eternal perfume of this harsh country. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out, answered by another miles away. He found the horse first. The animal lay on its side about 200 yards from his door, foam still wet on its muzzle. It had been run to death, pushed beyond any reasonable limit. Samuel knelt beside it, placed one hand on the creature's neck. The pulse was already fading. Nothing to be done. He stood scanning the landscape with eyes that had learned to read terrain during too many cavalry charges to count. That's when he saw her. She was crumpled against a boulder about 50 feet beyond the dead horse, her body twisted at an angle that spoke of pain and exhaustion. At first glance, she might have been just another piece of desert debris, something the wind had blown against the rock and abandoned. But then Samuel saw the blood, dark and wet, spreading across the shoulder of her torn dress, fresh enough to glisten in the dying light. He approached carefully, rifle ready, scanning the ridges above for whoever had fired those shots. Nothing moved except the evening wind, carrying with it the promise of a cold night ahead. The woman didn't stir as he knelt beside her. Her breathing was shallow, rapid, the kind of breathing that came before shock set in. Samuel holstered the rifle and reached for her shoulder to assess the wound. The moment his fingers touched the fabric of her dress, she exploded into motion. Her eyes snapped open, wide and green, and filled with a terror so absolute it hit him like a physical blow. She tried to scramble away, her back pressing harder against the boulder, one hand raised defensively. "Don't!" Her voice cracked on the single word. "Please don't." Samuel held perfectly still, his hands raised where she could see them. He'd seen that kind of fear before, not the fear of death or pain, but something older, something that lived in the bones. "I'm a doctor," he said quietly, keeping his voice level and calm. "You've been shot. That wound needs treatment, or you're going to die out here." She stared at him, her chest heaving with each breath. Blood continued to seep through her fingers where she clutched her shoulder. Her hair, dark brown and matted with dust and sweat, hung in tangles around a face that might have been pretty before exhaustion and pain carved new lines into it. She was young, maybe late 20s, but her eyes carried the weight of someone much older. "I can't." She shook her head, the movement sending fresh waves of pain across her features. "I can't let you touch me there. Please, I can't." Samuel had treated enough wounded soldiers, enough broken bodies, to recognize what he was seeing. His eyes moved from her face to her arms, noting the faded bruises in various stages of healing, yellow and green and purple forming a map of violence on her skin. There were marks around her wrists, the kind left by rope or shackles. And on her neck, partially hidden by her collar, he could see the edge of what looked like an old burn scar. Understanding settled over him like a cold wind. "Ma'am," he said, his voice gentler now, "that bullet needs to come out. I know you're scared. I know you have every reason to be. But if I don't treat that wound, you'll be dead by morning. And I'm guessing whoever shot you is still out there looking to finish the job. She held his gaze for a long moment. He could see her weighing her options, calculating odds that all came up bad. Finally, she gave a single tiny nod. But nothing more than necessary, she whispered. You understand, nothing more. Nothing more, Samuel agreed. You have my word as a physician and a gentleman. The walk back to his outpost took longer than it should have. She couldn't put any weight on her left side, and every step sent fresh blood running down her arm. Samuel supported her as best he could without causing more pain, acutely aware of how she flinched every time he adjusted his grip. The horse had died by the time they passed it, eyes already going glassy in the gathering darkness. His medical outpost was modest, just 3 rooms built into the canyon wall with thick adobe walls that kept out the worst of the desert heat. The main room served as his surgery examination space and living quarters all in one. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with whatever medicines and supplies he could get shipped in from Tucson twice a year. A single examination table dominated the center of the room, its surface scrubbed clean and ready. He helped her onto the table, careful to support her injured side. She moved like someone who'd learned to endure pain without showing it, her jaw clenched tight enough that he could see the muscle jumping. I need to cut away the fabric around the wound, Samuel said, reaching for his surgical scissors. I'll try to preserve your modesty as much as possible. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere above his head, deliberately not watching as he worked. The scissors were sharp, cutting through the blood-soaked cotton of her dress with practiced efficiency. He peeled back the fabric, carefully revealing the entry wound just below her collarbone. The bullet had punched through cleanly, no exit wound he could see. That meant it was still in there, probably lodged against bone. This is going to hurt, Samuel warned. I have laudanum if you want it. Something to dull the pain. No. Her response was immediate and firm. No drugs, I need to stay awake. Need to know what's happening. Samuel understood that too. The need to maintain control, even when control was an illusion. He'd seen it in soldiers who refused anesthesia before amputations, choosing agony over the vulnerability of unconsciousness. Then bite down on this. He handed her a leather strap worn smooth from years of the same use. And try not to move. He worked quickly but carefully, cleaning the wound with carbolic acid that made her gasp, despite her best efforts to stay silent. The bullet had indeed lodged against her scapula, embedded deep in muscle tissue. Samuel used a probe to locate it, feeling the metallic resistance as the instrument made contact. She bit down hard on the leather, her whole body rigid with pain, but she didn't cry out. It took 15 minutes to extract the bullet each second, an eternity of careful maneuvering to avoid damaging the artery that ran perilously close. When the lathe finally came free, Samuel dropped it into a metal pan where it landed with a musical clink. He showed it to her, this piece of attempted murder, now harmless and inert. Got it, he said. Now I need to clean and stitch. This part won't feel any better, but at least the worst is over. She nodded, her face pale and covered with a sheen of sweat. Samuel worked methodically, irrigating the wound channel, packing it with clean gauze, then beginning the delicate process of stitching the torn tissue back together. His hands were steady, guided by muscle memory earned through countless similar procedures during the war. Outside, full darkness had fallen. The only light came from the oil lamps he'd lit, casting warm shadows across the room. What's your name? Samuel asked, partly to distract her, partly because he wanted to know. She hesitated so long he thought she might not answer. Then quietly, Grace. Grace what? Another pause. Brennan. Grace Brennan. The name struck a chord in Samuel's memory. Brennan. He'd heard it before, connected to the Triple B ranch that lay somewhere to the north in the mountains beyond the desert. A big operation, one of the largest cattle spreads in the territory. But that had been years ago, and he didn't make a habit of keeping up with local news. I'm Samuel, he said, tying off another stitch. Samuel Garrett. You're safe here, Miss Brennan. Nobody knows you're here except me and Rosa. Rosa. Grace's eyes sharpened with worry. My housekeeper. She comes in the mornings, leaves before dark. Good woman. Discreet. She won't talk. People always talk, Grace said bitterly, especially about things they shouldn't. Samuel couldn't argue with that. He finished the last stitch and began bandaging the wound, wrapping clean white cotton around her shoulder and across her chest. She winced but didn't complain as he worked. How long? She asked. How long what? How long before I can travel? Samuel considered the question, studying the wound and the woman who bore it. 3 days minimum. You lost a lot of blood. You need rest food time for the body to start healing. Try to ride before then and you'll tear those stitches, probably bleed out before you get wherever you're trying to go. 3 days. Grace's voice held a note of panic. He'll find me in 3 days. He always finds me. Who will find you? She closed her eyes, her jaw working, as if she were physically chewing on whether to answer. When she spoke again, her voice had dropped to barely a whisper. My husband. The word landed between them like a stone dropped into still water. Samuel had suspected something along those lines, but hearing it confirmed brought a cold weight to his chest. He'd seen what men could do to their wives, especially out here, where the law was thin as desert air, and a woman's word counted for less than a horse's. Does he make a habit of shooting at you? Samuel asked, keeping his tone neutral. He doesn't usually miss. Grace opened her eyes again. But I ran farther this time. Pushed harder. I think I surprised him. How many times have you run? This is the fourth. Her laugh was bitter, empty of humor. First time I made it past the canyon. First time I've gotten this far. Samuel finished securing the bandage and stepped back, giving her space. You said he always finds you. How? He has men, trackers, and I... She paused, looking down at her hands. I don't know the land like they do. I always had to go back eventually. Nowhere else to go. What about family, friends? I had family once, her voice hardened. 3 years ago, before I married him. They probably think I'm dead by now. He made sure of that. Samuel moved to wash his hands in the basin by the window, considering his next words carefully. The moon had risen while he worked, casting silver light across the canyon floor. Somewhere in the distance, that same coyote called again, its voice lonely and defiant against the vast emptiness. You need rest, he finally said. I'll set up a bed in the back room. Door locks from the inside. You'll be safe there. Safe? Grace repeated the word like she'd forgotten its meaning. I haven't been safe in 3 years. Then tonight you will be. Tomorrow we'll figure out the rest. He helped her off the table, noting how carefully she moved, how she held herself as if her body were something fragile and potentially dangerous. In the back room, he'd prepared a narrow cot with clean sheets and a blanket. It wasn't much, but it was clean and private, and more importantly, it had a lock. Grace lowered herself onto the cot with visible relief, her good hand clutching the blanket. Samuel brought her water, watched her drink it in small, careful sips. Her eyes were already drooping with exhaustion. Thank you, she said quietly. I know you didn't have to help me. I'm a doctor, Samuel replied. Helping is what I do. Not everyone does, not for someone like me. Samuel wanted to ask what she meant by that, but her eyes had already closed. Within moments, her breathing had evened out into the rhythm of sleep. He stood there for a moment, watching her, noting the way, even in unconsciousness, she seemed coiled tight, ready to wake at the slightest sound. He left the room quietly, pulling the door shut behind him. In the main room, he cleaned his instruments by lamplight, his mind turning over the problem of Grace Brennan, a woman running from her husband, shot and wounded, terrified but determined. It was a situation with no good answers, only varying degrees of bad. The sound of hoofbeats brought his head up sharply. Samuel moved to the window, keeping himself in shadow, and watched as a rider approached the outpost. He relaxed slightly when he recognized Rosa's son, Miguel, leading his mother's mule. Dr. Garrett, the young man's voice carried across the quiet evening. My mother sent me. She says there was shooting heard near the canyon. She worried for you. Samuel stepped outside, grateful for Rosa's concern, even as he calculated how to handle this new complication. I'm fine, Miguel. Just some trouble passing through. Nothing to worry about. Miguel's dark eyes swept the area, taking in the dead horse still visible in the moonlight. That horse ran hard, Doctor, and there's blood on your porch. Smart boy. Too smart. Samuel made a decision. Miguel, I'm going to trust you with something. Can I count on your discretion? The young man straightened in his saddle. Always, Doctor. You know this. There's a woman inside. She's been hurt, shot by someone. She's scared and she's running. If anyone asks, if anyone comes looking, you haven't seen her. You understand? Miguel's expression hardened. He'd grown up in this territory, knew what happened to women who ran from powerful men. I understand, Doctor. I see nothing. I know nothing. Good man, tell your mother the same. And Miguel, Samuel paused. Tell her I might need supplies. Food for 2 medical materials. Quietly. I will tell her. Miguel turned his mule back toward town, then stopped. Doctor, be careful. Men who shoot women, they don't stop until they finish what they started. I know. Samuel watched until horse and rider disappeared into the darkness, then turned back to his outpost. The night had grown cold, as desert nights always did, the temperature dropping 40 degrees from the day's high. He built up the fire in the small stove more for light and comfort than warmth, and settled into his chair with a cup of coffee that had gone bitter from sitting too long. Sleep wouldn't come easy tonight. It rarely did anymore. 15 years of sleeping alone had taught him that the hours between midnight and dawn were the longest, the emptiest, the ones where ghosts walked freest. Tonight he had new company for those ghosts. The ghost of Grace Brennan's fear, the ghost of her husband's violence, the ghost of choices Samuel knew he'd have to make come morning. He must have dozed eventually because he woke to the sound of movement from the back room. The sky outside showed the first gray hints of dawn. Samuel stood, his back protesting the night spent in a chair, and moved quietly to check on his patient. Grace was sitting up in bed, her good hand pressed against her stomach, her face pale in the pre-dawn light. Samuel knew that look. He'd seen it on too many women, that particular combination of nausea and resignation. How long? He asked from the doorway. She looked up startled, then seemed to understand his question. 2 months, maybe a little more. The revelation settled over Samuel like a physical weight. A pregnant woman running from her husband, shot and wounded and terrified. The situation had just gotten exponentially more complicated. Does he know? Samuel asked. Grace shook her head. No, I only found out a week ago. That's why I had to run now. Before he knew. Before it was too late. Before he could use it to control you. Before he could use it to own me completely. She corrected him, her voice hard. This baby is mine. Only mine. He'll never touch it. Never hurt it the way he hurt me. Samuel understood then why she'd pushed herself so hard, why she'd risked death in the desert rather than stay wherever she'd come from. A child changed everything. A child made the stakes absolute. You need rest, he said gently, and food when you can keep it down. We'll talk more when the sun's up. But Grace was already shaking her head. You need to know what you're dealing with, Dr. Garrett. What kind of danger you've brought into your home by helping me. Tell me. She took a breath, wincing as the movement pulled at her stitches. My husband's name is Harrison Carver. He owns the Carver Spread about 60 miles northwest of here. Biggest ranch in 3 counties. Richest man in the territory, some say. Samuel felt ice form in his stomach. He knew the name. Everyone in Arizona Territory knew that name. Harrison Carver was rumored to be connected to everything from cattle rustling to political corruption, but nothing ever stuck. Men who crossed him tended to disappear or have accidents. The law looked the other way when Carver's name came up. And he's looking for you, Samuel said. It wasn't a question. He's always looking for me. Even when I'm right there in front of him, he's looking for the parts of me he can't control. Grace's hands twisted in the blanket. When I married him 3 years ago, I thought I was marrying a successful rancher, a man who could provide, who could protect. I was 24 and stupid, and my father had just died, and I needed someone to help save my family's ranch. The Triple B. You know it. I've heard the name. Grace nodded. My father built that ranch from nothing. When he had it, he left it to me and my 3 sisters. But we couldn't run it alone. We needed help, needed capital, needed a man's name on the deed because that's how things work out here. Harrison offered all of that. He seemed kind, seemed like the answer to our prayers. When did it change? The night we got married. Grace's voice had gone flat, emotionless, the tone of someone reciting facts too painful to feel. He took me to his ranch, locked me in a room, told me I belonged to him now that I'd do what he said, when he said, or he'd make sure my sisters lost everything. And then he showed me exactly what he meant by that. Samuel had heard enough stories like this to know where it led. The bruises he'd seen on Grace's body told the rest of the tale. He wanted to ask more, wanted to understand the full scope of what she'd endured, but the haunted look in her eyes stopped him. You don't have to tell me everything, he said, not unless you want to. You need to know, Grace insisted. You need to know that Harrison Carver doesn't lose. He doesn't let go of what he thinks belongs to him, and he'll kill anyone who tries to take it from him. I'm not trying to take anything from anyone. I'm just trying to keep a patient alive. To him, that's the same thing. Grace looked directly at Samuel, her green eyes hard with knowledge earned through suffering. If he finds out you're helping me, he'll come for you. He'll probably kill you. And he'll make it look like an accident or self-defense or whatever story serves him best. That's who you're dealing with, Dr. Garrett. That's what kind of man is hunting me. Samuel absorbed this information, turning it over in his mind. He'd faced dangerous men before, during the war and after. He'd learned that the truly dangerous ones were usually the ones who smiled while they destroyed you, who used systems and money and influence instead of bullets. Harrison Carver sounded like exactly that type. Then we'll have to make sure he doesn't find you here, Samuel said. He will, though. Grace's certainty was absolute. He has trackers, men who can follow a trail days old. They'll find where my horse died. They'll find the blood. They'll find this place. Let me worry about that. I can't let you risk your life for me. You don't even know me. Samuel moved to the window, watching as the sun broke over the canyon rim, flooding the desert with harsh morning light. He thought about his wife and daughter, buried now for 15 years. He thought about all the time since then that he'd turned away from trouble, chosen safety over involvement, let other people's problems stay other people's problems. Maybe that's exactly why I can help, he said quietly. I don't have anything left to lose. The sound of hoofbeats outside cut off whatever Grace might have said in response. Samuel tensed his hand, moving instinctively toward his rifle. But it was only Rosa arriving for her morning routine. He heard her exclamation of surprise when she saw the dead horse, heard her quick steps approaching the door. Doctor! Rosa burst into the main room, her round face creased with worry. Madre de Dios, what has happened? Miguel said there was trouble, but I didn't believe. She stopped short when she saw Samuel's expression. You have someone here. Rosa. Samuel kept his voice calm, authoritative. I need you to listen carefully. There's a woman in the back room. She's been injured. She's in danger. No one can know she's here. No one. Can I trust you? Rosa's eyes widened, but she nodded immediately. Of course, doctor. Always you can trust Rosa. But who is she who hurt her? The less you know, the safer you'll be. Bah! Rosa waved a dismissive hand. I am an old woman. I've survived banditos and Apaches and 3 husbands. I'm not afraid of whoever did this. What do you need me to do? Samuel felt a weight lift slightly. Rosa Martinez had been helping him run this outpost for the past 10 years. She was loyal, discreet, and tougher than most men he'd known. If anyone could be trusted with this secret, it was her. Food, he said, for 2. And we need to dispose of that horse outside, make it look like it was never here. Can you get Miguel to help with that? Miguel is already on his way back with his cousins. They will take care of it. Rosa moved toward the back room. Now let me see this woman. A doctor's hands are good for wounds, but a woman's hands are better for healing. Samuel didn't argue. He watched Rosa disappear into the back room, heard her soft exclamation of sympathy, heard Grace's quiet response. Outside, he could see Miguel and 2 other young men approaching with a cart. They worked quickly and efficiently, loading the dead horse and smoothing over the disturbed sand where it had fallen. Within an hour, there was no visible evidence that anything had happened here. But evidence wasn't the problem. The problem was time. Samuel had bought Grace 3 days, maybe 4 if she was lucky. After that, Harrison Carver's trackers would find this place. They'd ask questions. They'd demand answers. And Samuel would have to decide how far he was willing to go to protect a woman he barely knew. The morning passed quietly. Rosa made breakfast, coaxing Grace to eat small amounts of bread and weak tea. Samuel checked the wound, satisfied to see no signs of infection yet. He gave Grace willow bark tea for the pain and fever that would likely come. He made sure she understood how to care for the bandages, what signs to watch for that might indicate trouble. They didn't talk much. Grace seemed content to rest, conserving her strength. Samuel busied himself with his usual tasks, organizing supplies, preparing medicines, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. But his mind kept circling back to the problem at hand. A pregnant woman, a powerful, violent husband. 3 days, maybe 4. It was mid-afternoon when Rosa pulled him aside in the main room. Her expression was troubled. Doctor, she said quietly. I know this woman. Samuel's heart sank. You do? Not well, but I recognize her now. Grace Brennan, daughter of Thomas Brennan, who owned the Triple B Ranch. I saw her once, maybe 4 years ago, at a church social in Prescott. She was with her father and sisters. Happy then. Laughing. Rosa shook her head sadly. Now she looks like a ghost. She married Harrison Carver. Rosa's face darkened. That man. That devil. I heard stories about him. His first wife, she died under suspicious circumstances. Fell downstairs, they said. Broke her neck. But everyone knew. Everyone whispered. She crossed herself. He did it, and now he has this one. Not anymore, Samuel said. She left him. She left Harrison Carver. Rosa's eyes went wide. Madre de Dios, he will never allow this. Never. That's what she said. Rosa grabbed Samuel's arm, her grip surprisingly strong. Doctor, listen to me. You cannot let him take her back. Whatever it takes, you must protect her. That man is evil, pure evil. If he gets her back, he will kill her. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but he will kill her. I know. Do you, Rosa searched his face, do you truly know what you are doing? What it will mean to stand between Harrison Carver and something he thinks belongs to him? Samuel thought about his answer carefully. Did he know? Could anyone truly know what they were capable of until the moment of testing arrived? He'd been a doctor during the war, seen men reduced to their essential nature by violence and fear. He'd learned that comfortable assumptions about oneself rarely survived contact with reality. No, he admitted, I don't know what it will mean. But I know what it means to fail someone who needs help. I know what it costs to choose safety over doing what's right. And I'm tired of paying that price. Rosa studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Bueno, then I will help you. Miguel and his cousins, too. We don't let bastards like Carver win. Not while there's still good people willing to fight. The day stretched on hot and still. Samuel found himself watching the horizon more than usual, scanning for dust clouds that might signal approaching riders. Nothing came. The desert remained empty, indifferent to human drama. Evening brought Grace out of the back room, moving slowly but under her own power. She'd changed into a simple dress that Rosa had brought this one clean and whole. The bandage showed white against the fabric at her shoulder. Her color was better, though shadows still darkened the skin under her eyes. I need to leave, she said without preamble. Tonight, before he gets here. You're not strong enough, Samuel countered. You'd be lucky to make it 10 miles before you collapsed. Then I'll collapse 10 miles from here instead of bringing trouble to your door. Grace, Samuel stood from where he'd been mixing a fresh batch of carbolic solution. Running isn't going to solve this. You've run 3 times before, and he's caught you each time. You need a different plan. What plan? There is no plan. There's just run or go back, and I will die before I go back. Then we find another option. There is no other option. Grace's voice rose edged with desperation. Don't you understand? Harrison Carver owns half this territory. He has money, influence, men willing to do whatever he says. The law won't help me. My family can't help me. No one can help me. All I can do is run and hope he doesn't catch me before the baby comes. Hope I can disappear somewhere he'll never find me. That's not a plan, Samuel said quietly. That's a prayer. And prayers don't stop bullets. Grace's face crumpled. She sank into a chair, her good hand pressed against her stomach. I know. God help me, I know. But what else can I do? Where else can I go? Samuel moved to the window, his mind working through possibilities. Grace was right that running wouldn't solve anything. Carver had the resources to track her anywhere in the territory. And even if she somehow made it out of Arizona, what then? A woman alone, pregnant with no money and no support system. The odds weren't good. But staying put meant confrontation. It meant putting himself and Rosa and anyone else who helped between Grace and a man who apparently had no moral limits. It meant risking everything on a fight that might be unwinnable. Samuel thought about his wife again, about his daughter, about the telegram that had arrived at Field Hospital 17 years ago, informing him that both were dead. About how he'd finished his surgery, washed his hands, walked outside the tent, and screamed until his voice gave out. About how he'd made himself a promise that day. Never again. Never again would he let himself care enough that losing something could break him. He'd kept that promise for 15 years. Lived alone, helped people from a distance, never let anyone close enough to matter. It had been safe. Empty, but safe. Grace Brennan was asking him to break that promise. Not with words, she was too proud for that, but simply by existing. By being broken and brave and desperate all at once. By carrying a child she was determined to protect even if it cost her everything. The sound of hoofbeats broke Samuel's reverie. This time there were multiple horses moving at a steady walk. He grabbed his rifle, motioned for Grace to get back into the other room. She moved quickly despite her injury, fear lending her speed. Rosa appeared from somewhere outside, her face calm, but her eyes alert. 3 men, doctor. They wear deputy badges, but I don't recognize them from Prescott. Bought badges then, Carver's men wearing the appearance of law. Samuel checked his rifle, made sure the chamber was loaded, then stepped outside to meet them. The 3 riders stopped about 20 feet from the outpost. They sat easy in their saddles, hands near, but not on their weapons. The one in the middle looked to be the leader, an older man with gray in his beard and eyes that had seen too much violence to be shocked by more. "Help, you gentlemen," Samuel called out, keeping his rifle pointed down but ready. "Looking for someone," the gray-bearded man said. His voice carried the flat vowels of Missouri or Kansas. "A woman, brown hair, green eyes, about 27 years old. Her husband's worried sick about her. She ran off a few days back. He's concerned she might have hurt herself." "Haven't seen anyone matching that description," Samuel lied smoothly. "As you can see, I'm alone out here." The man's eyes swept the outpost, taking in every detail. "That's interesting, because we found a dead horse about 5 miles back, rode to death, and a blood trail leading this direction. Plenty of reasons for blood in the desert. Could have been a wounded animal." "Could have been." The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Mind if we take a look around just to be sure?" "I mind very much. This is a medical facility. I have patient confidentiality to maintain." "Patient confidentiality." The man repeated the words like they were foreign. "That's a fancy way of saying you're hiding someone." Samuel raised the rifle slightly, not quite pointing it at the riders, but making his intent clear. "That's a fancy way of saying my patient's privacy is protected by law. And unless you have a warrant signed by a judge, you're trespassing on private property." The standoff stretched out, tension building like summer heat. The other 2 riders shifted in their saddles, hands moving closer to their guns. The leader held up one hand, stopping them. "We can get a warrant," he said. "Might take a day or 2, but we can get one. You do that. In the meantime, I suggest you gentlemen move along." The leader studied Samuel for another long moment, then nodded slowly. "We'll be back, doctor. Count on it. And when we come back, it'll be with legal authority and more men. Harrison Carver takes care of his property. You'd do well to remember that." They turned their horses and rode off, moving south toward Prescott at an unhurried pace. Samuel watched until they disappeared from view, then lowered his rifle with hands that wanted to shake. He just made an enemy of one of the most powerful men in the territory. There was no taking it back now. Rosa appeared at his elbow. "They'll be back like they said. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe the day after." "I know. What will you do?" Samuel looked toward the back room where Grace waited, probably listening to every word. "I don't know yet, but I'm not handing her over. Whatever happens, I'm not doing that." Night fell over the canyon, bringing with it a cold that seemed to seep into Samuel's bones. He built up the fire and made coffee, more for something to do with his hands than because he wanted it. Grace emerged from the back room, her face pale but set with determination. "You should have let them take me," she said. "No. Samuel." "I said no." He kept his back to her, staring into the fire. "I've made my choice. Now we figure out what comes next." "What comes next is they'll come back with 20 men and a piece of paper that says they can tear this place apart. And when they find me, they'll probably kill you for interfering." "Probably." Grace was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was different, softer. "Why are you doing this? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." Samuel finally turned to face her. In the firelight, she looked impossibly young, impossibly vulnerable. But her eyes held steel, survivor's eyes. "Maybe I'm tired of not owing anyone anything," he said. "Maybe I'm tired of playing it safe while people suffer. Or maybe I just recognize that some fights are worth having whether you win them or not. This isn't your fight. It is now. They stood there in the firelight, two damaged people who'd found themselves on a collision course with forces neither could control. Outside, the desert wind moaned through the canyon, carrying with it the promise of storms to come. And somewhere in that vast darkness, Harrison Carver's men were riding back to their master with news that would change everything. News that someone had dared to stand between Carver and his property. News that would demand a response. Samuel Garrett had spent 15 years trying to forget how to care about people, trying to insulate himself from the pain of loss. In the space of one day, Grace Brennan had shattered that carefully constructed isolation. Now there was no going back, only forward into whatever consequences his choice had created. He thought about his wife one last time, wondered what she would think of him now, standing on the edge of a precipice with a stranger who needed him. Part of him hoped she'd understand. Part of him hoped she'd be proud, but mostly he hoped he was strong enough for what was coming. Because Grace Brennan was right about one thing. Harrison Carver wouldn't stop. He'd come for her with everything he had. And when he did, Samuel would have to decide exactly how far he was willing to go to protect a woman who trusted him with her life. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks spiraling up into darkness. Tomorrow would bring its own troubles. Tonight, at least, Grace was safe. Tonight, at least, Samuel had kept one person from being broken by a world that specialized in breaking people. It would have to be enough. Dawn came cold and unforgiving to Red Rock Canyon. Samuel had watched it arrive from his chair by the window, the rifle still across his lap, his body stiff from a night spent waiting for trouble that hadn't yet arrived. The sky bled from black to purple, to that peculiar shade of blue that promised another scorching day ahead. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out its voice sharp and hungry in the morning stillness. Grace emerged from the bower room, moving slowly, favoring her injured shoulder. Her face showed the telltale pallor of someone who'd spent the night fighting nausea, losing more often than winning. She caught Samuel watching her and straightened slightly, pride over riding discomfort. "I heard horses during the night," she said. "Was it them again?" "No, just nerves playing tricks." Samuel set the rifle aside and stood his joints, protesting the movement. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been shot, and I'm growing another human being inside me while running from a man who wants to kill me." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "So, about how you'd expect." The attempt at humor, dark as it was, told Samuel more about Grace's character than 100 conversations might have. People who could joke in the face of genuine terror were the ones who survived, the ones who kept their heads when everything fell apart. "Let me check the wound," he said, gesturing to the examination table. Grace hesitated, that familiar tension creeping back into her shoulders. But she moved to the table and carefully peeled back the collar of her dress to expose the bandaging. Samuel unwrapped it with practiced efficiency, noting with satisfaction that the stitches had held through the night. No fresh bleeding, no signs of the infection he'd been dreading. "Looks good," he said, beginning to apply fresh carbolic solution. "You're healing well, better than I expected given the circumstances." "I've had practice." The words came out flat, matter of fact. "This isn't my first time stitched back together." Samuel's hands stilled for just a moment. He wanted to ask, wanted to know the full scope of what Harrison Carver had done to this woman. But Grace's eyes had taken on that distant quality, the look of someone who'd learned to separate their mind from their body during moments of pain or violation. "Grace," he said quietly, "you don't have to tell me anything you don't want to. But if you do want to talk about it, I'm listening." She was silent while he finished cleaning the wound and applied fresh bandages. When she spoke again, her voice carried the careful neutrality of someone reciting facts too painful to feel. "The first time was 3 weeks after we married. I'd made dinner wrong, or served it at the wrong temperature, or looked at him the wrong way. I don't even remember the excuse anymore. They all blur together eventually." She paused, her jaw working. "He broke 2 of my ribs. Then he called for his personal doctor, told the man I'd fallen down the stairs. The doctor knew, I could see it in his eyes. But he set the ribs and prescribed laudanum and never said a word." Samuel continued, working his movements gentle despite the rage building in his chest. He'd seen this before during the war. Men who used their fists on women who hid behind respectability while inflicting calculated cruelty. He'd hated it then. He hated it more now. After that, it got worse, Grace continued. He'd break something, wait for it to heal, then break something else. Always careful, always in places that wouldn't show when I was dressed properly. He told me once that he was teaching me, that I needed to learn my place, that a wife who understood her position was a happy wife. You tried to leave before. 3 times? The first time I made it about 5 miles before his men caught me. They brought me back. Harrison locked me in a room for 2 weeks. No light, no company, just darkness and the sound of him walking past my door reminding me that I belonged to him. Her hands twisted in her lap. The second time I got farther, almost to the triple B, but he caught me again. That time he broke my arm, told everyone I'd fallen from a horse. And the third time was 8 months ago. I'd heard he was traveling to Tucson on business. Thought I had a week to get away, get to my sister's, get somewhere safe. But he'd lied about the trip. Came back early, found me gone. Grace's voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. When he caught me that time, he used fire. Held a branding iron close enough to my skin to blister it. Said next time he'd use it for real. Said he'd mark me so everyone would know I belonged to him. Samuel finished securing the bandage, his movements mechanical while his mind churned with dark thoughts. He'd killed men during the war. Killed them cleanly and quickly when they threatened his patients or his field hospital. He'd never enjoyed it, never sought it out, but he'd done it. Looking at Grace, now seeing the history of violence written in her posture and her eyes, Samuel found himself thinking about killing again. "Why did you marry him?" he asked, then immediately regretted the question. It sounded like blame when he'd meant it as genuine curiosity. But Grace didn't take offense. "My father died 3 years ago. Heart gave out one day while he was checking fence lines. Dropped dead at 56 without warning." She moved to the window, staring out at the canyon walls. "He left a triple B to me and my 3 sisters, Charlotte, Harper, and Ivy. We tried to run it ourselves. We had the knowledge, had the will, but we didn't have the money to keep it going through a bad drought. And we didn't have a man's name on the deed. The bank wouldn't loan to women. The bank wouldn't loan to anyone without collateral we didn't have. We were going to lose everything our father had built, everything he'd sacrificed for." Grace turned back to face Samuel. Harrison Carver showed up like an answer to prayer. Offered to marry me, invest in the ranch, keep it in the family. He seemed kind, generous. My sisters liked him. The whole territory respected him. "You couldn't have known." "Couldn't I?" Grace's laugh was bitter. Looking back now, there were signs. The way he talked about his first wife, always blaming her for her own death. The way his ranch hands looked at him, fear mixed with loyalty. The way he'd correct me in public, small things, always with a smile, but with steel underneath. She shook her head. "But I was desperate. We all were. So I ignored the signs and told myself I was making a smart choice. It wasn't your fault. Wasn't it I walked into that marriage with my eyes open? Maybe not all the way open, but open enough. I chose security over love, chose my family's future over my own happiness, and I've been paying for that choice every day since." Samuel moved to stand beside her at the window. Outside, the sun had fully risen, turning the canyon walls into bands of red and gold and amber. It would be another hot day. Already he could feel the temperature climbing. "You were trying to save your family," he said. "That's not a crime. It's not even a mistake. It's what people do when they love someone." It was stupid. It was human. They stood in silence for a moment, both looking out at the harsh beauty of the desert. Samuel thought about his own choices, his own mistakes. The decision to join the army as a surgeon, leaving his wife and daughter alone. The telegram. The funeral he'd missed because he'd been wrist-deep in another soldier's chest cavity, trying to repair damage that couldn't be repaired. "I had a family once," he heard himself say. The words came unbidden, pushed out by some need he hadn't known he still possessed. "A wife named Elizabeth, a daughter named Sarah. They died while I was away being a hero." Grace turned to look at him, her green eyes sharp with sudden attention. "The war, cholera, came through our town like wildfire, killed half the population in 2 weeks. Elizabeth got it first. She was trying to help the neighbors, trying to do what a doctor's wife should do. Sarah was only 7. She tried to take care of her mother when I wasn't there. Samuel's throat tightened on the words. They died within hours of each other. Someone sent me a telegram. I got it 3 days after they were already buried. I'm sorry. I finished the surgery I was doing when I got the news. Sewed the boy up, cleaned into my instruments, walked outside and screamed until I couldn't make sound anymore. He paused, remembering the feel of his throat going raw, the taste of copper and rage. Then I went back inside and kept working, because that's what doctors do. We keep working even when our whole world burns down. Is that why you're out here alone in the middle of nowhere? I came out here 15 years ago because I couldn't stand being around people anymore. Couldn't stand the questions, the sympathy, the constant reminder that everyone else got to keep their families while mine was gone. Samuel turned from the window. I told myself I was still helping people, still doing good work. But really I was just hiding, putting enough distance between myself and the world that nothing could hurt me again. Did it work? For a while. Then you showed up bleeding on my doorstep and ruined 15 years of careful isolation. Grace studied his face, searching for something. You could still turn me away. Give me supplies, point me toward the mountains, wash your hands of the whole situation. I could, but you won't. No. Why not? Samuel considered the question. Why not? Indeed, it would be easier, safer. It would preserve the careful shell he'd built around himself. But looking at Grace now, seeing the way she held herself with such careful dignity, despite everything she'd endured, Samuel realized he was tired of easy, tired of safe, tired of living like a ghost haunting his own life. Because for the first time in 15 years, I only have a reason to care whether I wake up tomorrow, he said simply. And I'm not ready to give that up yet. Before Grace could respond, the sound of approaching horses brought both of them to alert. Samuel grabbed his rifle, moved to the window. Rosa's mule was coming up the path, but she wasn't alone. Deputy Tom Walsh rode beside her, his young face serious beneath his hat. It's the deputy from Prescott, Samuel said. Done. The one who helped us escape yesterday. Grace tensed one hand, moving protectively to her stomach. Can we trust him? I don't know, but we're about to find out. Samuel stepped outside as Rosa and the deputy dismounted. Rosa's face showed worry, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by grim determination. Deputy Walsh looked like he hadn't slept, his uniform dusty and his eyes shadowed. Dr. Garrett, Walsh said without preamble, we need to talk, all of us. Samuel gestured them inside. Grace had retreated to the examination table, sitting with her spine straight and her chin raised. She looked like a woman preparing for judgment. Walsh removed his hat when he saw her, a gesture of respect that seemed to take her by surprise. Miss Brennan, he said, I apologize for the intrusion, but there are things you both need to know. Before you say anything, Samuel cut in, I want to make something clear. If you're here to arrest anyone or enforce some warrant Harrison Carver has bought and paid for, you can turn around right now. Walsh shook his head. I'm not here for Carver. I'm here because I actually believe in the law, and what Carver's doing isn't it. Then what are you here for? Grace asked, her voice steady despite the tension in her shoulders. Walsh pulled out a chair and sat heavily, suddenly looking much older than his 20-something years. I'm here to tell you that Sheriff Donovan is in Carver's pocket. Has been for years. Those 3 men who came here yesterday, they're not real deputies. They're Carver's hired guns wearing badges that Donovan gave them. And they're coming back tonight with a warrant. How do you know this? Because I was there when they got it. Donovan had Judge Morrison sign it, claimed you'd abducted Mrs. Carver, that she was mentally unstable and needed to be returned to her husband's care for treatment. Walsh's jaw tightened. It's all lies, but it's legal lies, and that makes them dangerous. Samuel felt cold settle into his bones. How many men? 20, maybe more. They're planning to come at dusk, surround this place, demand you surrender Mrs. Carver. If you refuse, they'll storm it. And if anyone gets hurt or killed in the process, Carver will make sure it looks like you started it. Grace made a small sound, quickly stifled. Samuel moved to stand beside her, offering what comfort his presence could provide. Why are you telling us this? He asked Walsh. Why risk yourself? The deputy was quiet for a moment, his fingers working the brim of his hat. My sister was married to a man like Harrison Carver. Different name, different face, same kind of monster. He broke her down piece by piece until there was nothing left. She hung herself in their barn when I was 12 years old. He looked up, meeting Grace's eyes. I couldn't save my sister. But maybe I can help you, if you'll let me. Rosa crossed herself, murmuring a prayer in Spanish. Samuel saw Grace's eyes fill with tears, quickly blinked away. She stood crossed to where Walsh sat and held out her hand. Thank you, she said simply, for seeing me as a person instead of property. Walsh took her hand gently, mindful of her injuries. You deserve better than what he's done to you, ma'am. We all know it. Most people are just too scared of Carver to say it out loud. Most people have sense, Grace replied. They have families to protect, lives to preserve. Standing up to Harrison Carver is a good way to lose both. Which is why you need to leave, Walsh said, releasing her hand. Tonight before they get here. I can delay them, maybe buy you a few hours head start, but you need to run, and you need to run far. Samuel had been thinking along the same lines, but hearing it stated so baldly brought all his tactical instincts to the fore. Running won't solve this. She's tried it before. Carver always catches her. Then she needs to run farther, out of the territory entirely. California, maybe, or Mexico. With what money? Grace asked. With what resources? I have nothing but the clothes on my back and a bullet hole in my shoulder. How far do you think I'll get in that condition? Farther than you'll get if you stay here and let them take you back. He's right about that, Samuel admitted, but he's also right that running isn't a permanent solution. Carver has money connections. He can hire people to track Grace anywhere. Rosa, who'd been silent until now, spoke up in her heavily accented English. What about the Triple B? Her sisters, they would help. No. Grace shook her head. I can't go there. That's the first place Harrison will look. He knows I'd try to reach them. He probably has men watching the ranch already. Then we bring them here, Samuel said, an idea forming. Your sisters, how many ranch hands do they have? Maybe 15. Good men, most of them. Men my father hired. Grace paused, understanding dawning in her eyes. But Harrison has more. He could bring 50 men if he wanted to. Numbers aren't everything. If we can get your sisters here, with their men fortify this position, we might be able to hold out long enough to force a different solution. What different solution? Walsh asked. Carver owns the law. He owns the judge. Hell, he probably owns half the territorial government, and there is no legal solution to this. Samuel moved to the window, his mind working through possibilities. The canyon provided natural defensive positions. The outpost itself was built into the rock face, making it difficult to assault from most angles. With enough men and ammunition, they could hold off a larger force at least for a while. But Walsh was right about the legal situation. Even if they successfully defended against Carver's attack, it wouldn't change the fundamental problem. Grace was still legally married to the man. The law was still on his side. Fighting would only delay the inevitable. Unless. Grace, Samuel said slowly, an idea taking shape. When you married Carver, did you sign any papers, contracts, agreements, anything in writing? Just the marriage certificate. Why? Because there might be a legal way out of this. If we can prove he's been abusing you, demonstrate a pattern of violence, we might be able to get the marriage annulled. Not a divorce which would require his consent, but an annulment on the grounds of fraud or cruelty. Walsh shook his head. You'd need a judge willing to hear the case, and like I said, Judge Morrison is in Carver's pocket. Then we find a different judge. There's a territorial judge in Tucson, isn't there, Judge Blackwood? Blackwood's honest, Walsh admitted. One of the few who can't be bought. But getting to him means traveling 200 miles through territory where Carver has eyes everywhere. Not if we don't travel on the roads. Samuel was warming to the idea now, seeing how the pieces might fit together. The mountains north of here, they connect to old Apache trails. Rough country, but passable if you know the way. We could get Grace to the Triple B hole up there while someone makes the trip to Tucson to bring back Judge Blackwood. Judge Blackwood won't come all the way out here based on the worst of a runaway wife, Walsh pointed out. You'd need evidence, testimony from multiple sources, medical documentation. I can provide medical documentation. Samuel gestured to Grace. I've examined her injuries, old and new. I can testify to a pattern of abuse that no accidental falls could explain. And I can testify to what I've seen, Rosa added. The way she flinches from touch, the fear in her eyes, these things, they don't lie. Grace had been following the conversation with growing hope in her expression. but now she held up one hand, stopping them. Wait, you're all talking about risking your lives, your reputations, everything you have. For me, a woman you barely know. Why would you do that? Rosa reached out and took Grace's hand in both of hers. Because, mija, some things are worth the risk. Some fights need to be fought even when the odds are bad. Your father, he was a good man. He helped my family when we had nothing. Now we help his daughter. Is simple. Nothing about this is simple, Grace said, but her voice cracked on the words. The right thing rarely is, Walsh agreed, but that doesn't make it less right. Samuel watched Grace struggle with the decision, saw the war playing out behind her eyes. The instinct to protect herself warred with the desperate need to accept help, to trust that maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of the nightmare her life had become. If we do this, she finally said, if we try this plan, we need to be clear about something. Harrison Carver doesn't lose. Ever. He'll come after all of you. He'll destroy your lives, your families, everything you care about. Are you really prepared for that? I've already lost everything I care about, Samuel said quietly. Carver can't take what's already gone. My sister is already dead, Walsh added, and I've been looking for a reason to stand up to men like him since the day we buried her. And I am an old woman with 3 dead husbands and nothing to lose but my dignity, Rosa finished, which I will not lose by letting a devil like Carver win. Grace looked at each of them in turn, her eyes bright with unshed tears. You're all insane. You know that, right? Probably, Samuel agreed, but insanity seems to be contagious around here. The ghost of a smile touched Grace's lips. Then she straightened her shoulders, wincing slightly at the pull on her injury. All right, we do this. We fight, but we fight smart and we fight together. No unnecessary risks, no heroics. We do exactly what needs to be done and nothing more. Agreed, Samuel said. The others nodded. Walsh stood, replacing his hat. I'll ride back to Prescott, see if I can slow down Carver's men. Buy you some time to get in touch with the Triple B and prepare. But doctor, you need to understand something. Once this starts, there's no going back. Carver will never forgive you for this. Even if we win, even if we get Grace free legally, he'll spend the rest of his life trying to destroy you. Then I guess I'd better make for whatever time I have left is worth destroying, Samuel replied. After Walsh left, the 3 of them sat around the small table in Samuel's main room and began to plan in earnest. Rosa knew the Apache trails had family who still used them for trading routes. She could guide them to the Triple B if needed. Grace knew her sisters knew which of their ranch hands could be trusted and which might be swayed by Carver's money or threats. And Samuel knew medicine, knew wounds and healing, and how to keep people alive when everything was working to kill them. He also knew tactics from his years as a field surgeon, had learned by necessity how to defend field hospitals against enemy raids. It wasn't much, but it was something. As the morning wore on, they refined the plan. Rosa would send Miguel north with a message to the Triple B, letting Grace's sisters know she was alive and in danger. Samuel would document Grace's injuries, creating a medical record that could serve as evidence. Walsh would work to delay Carver's men, hopefully buying them at least one more day. And Grace, despite her injuries and her exhaustion and her pregnancy, would do the hardest thing of all. She would trust, would allow herself to believe that maybe this time would be different, that maybe she really could escape the man who turned her life into a waking nightmare. The afternoon brought heat that made the air shimmer and dance. Samuel checked Grace's wound again, pleased to see that it continued to heal cleanly. She was young and strong, her body resilient despite the abuse it had endured. With rest and proper nutrition, she'd recover fully from the gunshot. The other wounds, the deeper ones that didn't show on skin, those would take longer. Can I ask you something? Grace said as Samuel rewrapped her bandage. Of course, boss. Earlier when you talked about your family, you said you couldn't stand being around people anymore after they died. But you're a doctor. Your whole profession is about being around people, helping them. Samuel considered his answer carefully. There's a difference between treating someone's body and knowing their soul. I can set bones and stitch wounds and prescribe medicines without ever really seeing the person underneath. It's a kind of intimacy being someone's doctor. But it's also a kind of distance. They need me for a specific thing, and once that thing is done, they leave. No lasting connections, no risk of caring too much. That sounds lonely. It was meant to be. Grace was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the edge of the fresh bandage. What changed? Why care now? I don't know that I have a good answer to that. Samuel moved to wash his hands, buying time to organize his thoughts. Maybe I was just tired of being lonely. Or maybe seeing someone else in pain reminded me that isolation doesn't actually protect you from suffering. It just means you suffer alone. Is that what you think I've been doing, suffering alone? Haven't you? Grace's laugh was soft and sad. I suppose I have. Even when I was with Harrison, surrounded by his people and his things, I was alone. Maybe more alone than I'd ever been in my life. She looked up at Samuel, her green eyes direct and unflinching. Do you think that changes? Can someone who's learned to be alone ever really learn to be with people again? I think we're about to find out, Samuel said. Both of us. The sound of hoofbeats interrupted whatever Grace might have said next. But this time it was Miguel, returning riding hard and fast. He pulled his horse to a stop in a spray of dust and jumped down, his young face flushed with excitement and fear. Doctor, he called out. Doctor, you need to hear this. Samuel stepped outside Grace, following despite his gesture for her to stay inside. Miguel was breathless, his words tumbling over each other in his haste to get them out. I rode to the Triple B like Mama said. Gave them the message about Miss Brennan. Her sisters, they're coming. All three of them with 15 men and enough guns for a war. He paused, catching his breath. But doctor, there's more. There's a man in Prescott, been there since yesterday. He's asking questions about you, about this place, offering money for information. What kind of man? Samuel asked, though he already knew the answer. Rich man, powerful looking. He has these cold eyes like a snake. He's staying at the hotel, acting like he owns the whole town. Miguel's voice dropped. The bartender, he told me this man's name. Harrison Carver. Grace made a small sound, quickly stifled. Samuel felt his gut tighten with apprehension. Carver was already here, already in Prescott. That meant they had even less time than he'd thought. How long ago did you see him? Samuel asked. 2 hours, maybe less. I rode straight here as fast as I could. 2 hours. If Carver was organizing his men, gathering his forces, they might have until nightfall, or they might have minutes. There was no way to know. Samuel made a decision. Grace, get your things, whatever you can carry. We're leaving now. Leaving where? North, into the mountains. We'll meet your sisters on the trail hole, up somewhere defensible, until we can figure out the next move. But you said we had time. You said we could fortify here. That was before Carver came to Prescott, personally. Samuel was already moving, gathering medical supplies, ammunition, anything they might need. He's not the kind of man who sends others to do his work when he's angry enough. He's here to take you back himself, which means he's not going to wait for legal niceties or proper warrants. He's coming tonight, and he's coming hard. Rosa appeared from the back room with a pack already assembled. She must have been preparing it while they talked, anticipating this moment. I have food, water, bandages, enough for 3 days if you're careful. 3 days to get to the Triple B, Grace asked. 3 days to stay alive, Rosa corrected. After that, we trust in Mott and good men. They worked quickly, efficiently, loading supplies onto Samuel's horse and a second one that Miguel had brought. Grace moved more slowly, her injury limiting her range of motion, but she didn't complain. Samuel noticed how she kept one hand protectively over her stomach, a gesture she probably didn't even realize she was making. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon when they finally set out. Samuel rode in front, his rifle across his saddle. Grace rode behind him on her own horse, sitting straight, despite the pain he knew she must be feeling. Miguel and Rosa remained behind to watch the outpost, to delay any pursuit if they could. Be careful, mija, Rosa said, pressing a rosary into Grace's hand. You pray to La Virgin. She protects mothers and children. She will keep you safe. Grace clutched the rosary, tears streaming down her face. Thank you for everything. I don't know how to repay you. You live, Rosa said simply. You live and you raise that baby and you be happy. That's how you repay me. The trail into the mountains was narrow and treacherous, winding between massive boulders and along cliff sides that dropped away into darkness. Samuel guided them carefully, relying on instincts he'd developed during the war, when navigating unfamiliar terrain could mean the difference between life and death. Behind them, Red Rock Canyon fell away, growing smaller, with each step of the horses. They rode in silence for the first hour, both of them listening for sounds of pursuit, but the desert remained quiet except for the wind and the occasional call of a bird. The sun painted the rocks in shades of crimson and gold, beautiful and indifferent to human drama. It was Grace who finally broke the silence. Samuel. Yes. What you said earlier about having a reason to care whether you wake up tomorrow. Did you mean that? Samuel considered lying, considered deflecting the question. But something about the fading light and the dangerous journey ahead made him choose honesty instead. Yes, he said simply. I meant it. I'm glad, Grace said softly, because I need you to wake up tomorrow, and the day after that. And the day after that, I need you to survive this Samuel Garrett, because I don't think I can do it alone. You're not alone anymore. No, Grace agreed, a note of wonder in her voice. I suppose I'm not. They rode on into the gathering dusk, two broken people fleeing toward an uncertain future. Behind them, Harrison Carver was preparing his men, planning his assault, confident in his power and his right to reclaim what he considered his property. Ahead of them, Grace's sisters were riding south with their own small army, ready to defend their youngest sister against the man who'd stolen her away 3 years ago. And somewhere in between, on a narrow trail through ancient mountains, Samuel and Grace forged an alliance built on mutual pain and desperate hope. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the beginning of something that might become love, given time and luck, and the kind of courage that only came from having nothing left to lose. The stars began to emerge overhead, cold and distant and beautiful. Samuel found himself thinking about his wife again, about the promise he'd made 15 years ago, to never care about anyone again. He was breaking that promise, had already broken it the moment he'd chosen to help Grace instead of turning her away. And strangely, that breaking felt less like betrayal and more like release, like he'd been holding his breath for 15 years and was finally slowly learning to breathe again. The night would bring its own dangers. Tomorrow would bring more. But tonight, riding through the mountains with a woman who trusted him, despite every reason not to, Samuel felt something he'd thought was dead forever. He felt alive. The mountain trail grew steeper as darkness settled over the land like a thick blanket. Samuel guided his horse carefully, acutely aware of Grace riding behind him, her breathing labored from pain and exhaustion. The temperature had dropped sharply once the sun disappeared, and he could see his breath misting in the air with each exhale. They'd been riding for 3 hours when Samuel heard it, a sound so faint he almost missed it beneath the wind and the clatter of hooves on stone. Horses, multiple horses, moving fast through the canyon they'd left behind. Samuel, Grace's voice was tight with fear. She'd heard it too. I know, keep moving. We need to put more distance between us and them. But distance was a relative thing in this terrain. The trail they followed wound back on itself repeatedly, switchbacking up the mountain face. Someone below could potentially see them silhouetted against the rocks if they had enough moonlight. And tonight, unfortunately, the moon was nearly full. Samuel urged his horse faster, pushing the animal to its limits on the treacherous path. Behind him, he could hear Grace struggling to keep pace, could hear the small sounds of pain she tried to suppress. They couldn't maintain this speed for long. Grace's wound would reopen, or one of the horses would break a leg on the uneven ground, or they'd simply ride right off the trail in the darkness. The choice was made for him when gunfire cracked through the night air. The bullet hit stone somewhere to Samuel's right, spraying chips of rock that stung his face. His horse reared, nearly throwing him before he got it back under control. Grace, get down. She was already sliding from her saddle, using the horse's body as cover. Samuel dismounted and pulled his rifle free, scanning the darkness below. He could see movement now, shadows against shadows. At least 4 riders, maybe more. They'd closed the distance faster than he'd expected. Another shot rang out, this one closer. Samuel returned fire, aiming for muzzle flash rather than any specific target. The sound echoed off the canyon walls, multiplying until it seemed like a dozen rifles were firing at once. We can't stay here, Grace said, her voice remarkably steady given the circumstances. They'll flank us, trap us against the cliff. She was right. Samuel could already see riders moving to cut off their escape route. In minutes, they'd be surrounded, pinned down with nowhere to run. There, Grace pointed to a narrow gap in the rocks about 50 yards ahead. That leads to the caves. My father showed them to me once. If we can reach them, we can lose them in the passages. Samuel didn't question her knowledge. They abandoned the horses, grabbing only what they could carry, and ran for the gap. Behind them, shouts rang out as Carver's men realized their quarry was escaping. More gunfire followed, bullets whining off stone, but in the darkness and confusion, the shots went wide. The gap was barely wide enough for Samuel's shoulders. He pushed through, feeling rocks scrape his jacket, then turned to help Grace. She was breathing hard, one hand pressed to her injured shoulder, where fresh blood was seeping through the bandage. But her eyes were clear and focused. "How far to the caves?" Samuel asked. "Maybe 100 yards. But the path is narrow. One wrong step and it's a 100-foot drop." They moved as quickly as they dared, Grace leading now. Samuel could hear Carver's men reaching the gap, hear their frustrated curses as they realized how narrow it was. Most of them would have to dismount and come through single file. That bought time, but not much. The cave mouth appeared suddenly, a darker shadow against the night sky. Grace ducked inside, and Samuel followed immediately, struck by the change in temperature. The cave was warm, almost hot, with air that smelled of minerals and ancient stone. "Keep going," Grace urged. "There are multiple passages. We can lose them in here." They moved deeper into the cave system, Grace navigating by memory and touch. Samuel kept one hand on the wall, the other on his rifle. Behind them, he could hear men entering the caves, could hear their voices echoing strangely in the confined space. "This way." Grace pulled him into a side passage so narrow they had to turn sideways to fit through. On the other side, the passage opened into a larger chamber. Grace moved to the far wall where a pile of old timber and debris had accumulated. "Help me," she said, already pulling at the wood. "We can block the passage. It won't stop them forever, but it'll slow them down." They worked quickly, piling timber and rocks into the narrow opening. It wasn't perfect, but it would make pursuit difficult. When they finished, Grace led Samuel deeper into the cave system through passages that twisted and turned until Samuel had completely lost his sense of direction. Finally, they emerged into a large chamber lit by moonlight, filtering through cracks in the ceiling above. Water trickled down one wall, collecting in a small pool. The air here was cooler, fresher. "We can rest here," Grace said, then her knees buckled. Samuel caught her before she hit the ground, lowering her carefully. In the dim light, he could see that her shoulder was bleeding freely now, the bandage completely saturated. She'd torn the wound open during their flight. "I need to look at this," he said, already reaching for the medical supplies he'd managed to grab. Grace nodded, too exhausted to argue. Samuel worked by feel, as much as sight, cleaning the wound as best he could, applying pressure to stop the bleeding. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, but inside he was cursing himself. She should be resting in a bed, not running through caves and dodging bullets. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have gotten you away sooner. Should have anticipated that Carver would move this fast." "Stop." Grace's hand caught his wrist. "You've done more for me than anyone has in 3 years. Don't you dare apologize for saving my life. Your life wouldn't need saving if you'd turned me away, let me die in the desert, given me back to Harrison." She shook her head. "Samuel, you gave me hope, real hope, for the first time since I married that monster. Don't diminish that." Samuel tied off the fresh bandage and sat back, his own exhaustion finally catching up with him. They were trapped in a cave, pursued by armed men with limited supplies and no clear way out. The odds weren't good. "What now?" Grace asked, echoing his thoughts. "Now we rest for an hour, let them waste time searching the wrong passages. Then we keep moving. These caves must have multiple exits. We find one that leads north toward the Triple B. And if Carver's men find us first..." Samuel checked his rifle, counting the remaining ammunition. "Then we make them regret it." They sat in silence for a while, listening to distant sounds of men searching the caves. Occasionally, voices would echo through the passages, distorted beyond recognition. Once a light appeared at the far end of their chamber, but it moved on without the bearer investigating further. It was during this quiet that Grace spoke again, her voice soft in the darkness. "Samuel, can I tell you something?" "Of course. I'm scared, not just of Harrison finding us. I'm scared of what happens if we actually escape, if we somehow manage to get me free of him legally." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I don't know how to be a person anymore, a real person with choices and freedom. Harrison spent 3 years breaking me down, teaching me that I'm nothing without him. And even though I know that's a lie, even though I hate him for what he's done, part of me believes it." Samuel moved closer, careful not to touch her uninvited. "You know what I see when I look at you? A broken woman running from her past. I see someone who's been shot, chased, and hunted, but who's still fighting. Someone who climbed mountains and navigated caves in the dark while bleeding from a bullet wound. Someone who's protecting her unborn child with everything she has. He paused. That's not broken, Grace. That's the strongest person I've ever met. You don't know me well enough to say that. Maybe not, but I know courage when I see it. I saw plenty of it during the war. Saw men do extraordinary things when circumstances demanded audit. But most of them had training, had brothers in arms, had a cause they believed in. You have nothing but determination and a will to survive. That's harder. That takes more strength. Grace was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. What if I can't do this? What if we get me free and I just fall apart? Then you fall apart and we put you back together. That's what people do for each other. That's what families do. Is that what we are, family? Samuel considered the question. They'd known each other less than 3 days. They'd shared danger and fear and pain, but did that make them family? He thought about his wife, about his daughter, about the 15 years he'd spent avoiding exactly this kind of connection. I think we're becoming something, he said carefully. What it is exactly, I don't know yet. But I know I care whether you live or die. I know I'd rather be here in this cave with you than safe at my outpost alone. That has to count for something. It count for everything, Grace whispered. The hour passed slowly. Samuel dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound. Grace slept more soundly, exhaustion overriding fear. When Samuel judged enough time had passed, he gently woke her. We need to move. Can you walk? Grace stood testing her weight. She was pale and obviously in pain, but she nodded. I can walk. Let's go. They navigated deeper into the cave system, following air currents that suggested an opening somewhere ahead. The passages grew tighter, forcing them to crawl in places. Samuel could hear Grace's labored breathing behind him, hear the small sounds of pain she couldn't quite suppress. After what felt like hours but was probably only one, they emerged onto a ledge overlooking a valley. Below them, perhaps a mile distant, Samuel could see lights. Many lights arranged in a rough square. The triple B, Grace breathed. We made it. We actually made it. But their relief was short-lived. Behind them, echoing through the caves, came the sound of voices. Carver's men had found their trail. Can you climb down? Samuel asked, studying the cliff face. It wasn't quite vertical, with enough handholds to make descent possible, but it would be dangerous in the dark. I don't have much choice, do I? They started down, moving carefully from handhold to handhold. Samuel went first, testing each grip before putting his weight on it, calling up directions to Grace. She followed gamely, though he could hear her breathing growing more ragged with each downward movement. They were perhaps halfway down when Grace's foot slipped. She cried out, scrabbling for purchase, and for one horrible moment Samuel thought she was going to fall. But she caught herself pressing flat against the rock face, trembling with fear and exhaustion. I can't, she gasped. I can't do this. Yes, you can. Look at me, Grace. Look at me. She turned her head, her eyes wide with terror. You can do this, Samuel said firmly. One handhold at a time. Don't think about the whole climb. Just think about the next grip. Can you do that? Just one more grip? Grace took a shuddering breath, then nodded. One more grip. That's right, one more. They continued the descent, one grip at a time, Samuel talking her through each movement. By the time they reached the bottom, both of them were shaking with exhaustion. But there was no time to rest. Above them, lights appeared at the cave mouth. Carver's men had reached the ledge. Samuel grabbed Grace's hand, and they ran toward the distant lights of the Triple B ranch. The ground was rough, studded with rocks and sagebrush that caught at their clothes. Grace stumbled repeatedly, her strength finally giving out. Samuel half carried her the last 100 yards. They were perhaps 50 feet from the ranch house when a voice called out from the darkness. That's far enough. Identify yourselves or I start shooting. Charlotte, Grace's voice cracked. Charlotte, it's me. It's Grace. There was a moment of stunned silence. Then a woman emerged from behind cover, a rifle in her hands. Even in the darkness, Samuel could see the family resemblance. Same dark hair, same green eyes, same determined set to her jaw. Grace, the woman's voice was disbelieving. My God, Grace. She ran forward, pulling her sister into an embrace that made Grace cry out in pain. Charlotte immediately pulled back, her eyes going to the blood on Grace's shoulder. "You're hurt. What happened? Where have you been? We thought you were dead. Harrison said you'd run away, that you'd probably died in the desert, but we never believed." She stopped, finally processing Samuel's presence. "Who are you?" "Dr. Samuel Garrett. I've been treating your sister. She's been shot, and she's pregnant, and Harrison Carver is about 5 minutes behind us with armed men." Charlotte's expression hardened. She turned and shouted toward the house. "Harper Ivy, get out here and bring everyone who can shoot." The ranch house exploded into activity. People emerged armed and ready, taking up defensive positions with the efficiency of those who had done this before. Two more women appeared clearly at Grace's other sisters. One of them, slender and dark-haired, gasped when she saw Grace. "Oh my God, Gracie, we thought—" She couldn't finish the sentence, her voice breaking on a sob. "I'm alive, Ivy. I'm here." Grace swayed and Samuel caught her again. "Get her inside," Charlotte ordered. "Doctor, can you treat her? I need light and clean water in my medical bag, which is back in a cave being searched by Carver's men. We have a medical kit. It's not much, but it's something." Charlotte was already moving, issuing orders. "Harper, take the doctor and Grace inside. Get them whatever they need. Ivy, make sure all the approaches are covered. If Carver wants a fight, we'll give him one." Samuel helped Grace into the ranch house, into a large room that had been hastily converted into a makeshift hospital. Harper, who turned out to be the middle sister, brought clean bandages and water. She worked efficiently, helping Samuel remove Grace's blood-soaked dress and replace it with a clean nightgown. "The wound's reopened," Samuel said, examining it by lamplight. "But there's no new damage to the underlying tissue. I can re-stitch it, but she needs rest. Real rest for days, not hours." "She'll get it," Harper said firmly. "No one's taking our sister anywhere." Samuel was cleaning the wound when they heard it. Hoofbeats, many of them. And then a voice calling out from the darkness, cultured and calm, and absolutely terrifying in its reasonable tone. "Grace, darling, I know you're in there. Come out now and we can talk about this. I'm not angry. I understand you were confused that the baby has your mind turned around. But it's time to come home." Grace's whole body went rigid. Samuel had never seen such pure terror in another human being's eyes. "That's him," she whispered. "That's Harrison." Samuel moved to the window, careful to stay in shadow. He could see at least 20 men arranged in a semicircle around the ranch house. In the center, mounted on a magnificent black horse, sat a man who could only be Harrison Carver. He was handsome in a cold patrician way. Well-dressed even for a night raid, his clothes expensive and carefully maintained. But it was his eyes that struck Samuel. Even from this distance, even in poor light, he could see the absolute certainty in those eyes. The unshakable belief that he owned everything he looked at, including the woman trembling in the room behind Samuel. Charlotte stepped out onto the porch, her rifle held loosely but ready. "Harrison Carver, you're trespassing on Triple B land. Turn around and leave, or we'll defend our property." Carver's smile was condescending. "Charlotte, always the dramatic one. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm simply here to collect my wife. She's ill, you see. The pregnancy has affected her mind. She needs medical care that only I can provide. Your wife is here of her own free will. She doesn't want to go with you. She doesn't know what she wants. That's the nature of her illness." Carver's voice remained calm, reasonable. "Now I'm asking nicely. Send her out. If you cooperate, there won't be any trouble. If you don't, well, I have a legal warrant for her return. I have 20 men, and I have all the time in the world." "Then you'd better get comfortable," Charlotte replied, "because we have 30 men, we're on our own land, and we'll die before we let you take our sister." It was a lie about the number Samuel knew. They had perhaps 15 men at most, but Carver couldn't know that for certain in the darkness. The reasonable facade cracked slightly. "Don't be a fool, Charlotte. You can't win this fight. I own the law. I own the judges. I own this entire territory. All you have is a ranch that's barely profitable and loyalty that money can't buy. Guess which one wins?" "We'll find out," Charlotte said and stepped back into the house. The siege began in earnest as dawn approached. Carver's men took up positions around the ranch, cutting off any escape routes. They didn't attack directly, just waited, a constant threatening presence. Inside, the Brennan sisters and their ranch hands prepared for a fight they couldn't win. Samuel stayed with Grace, monitoring her condition. The wound had been restitched, but she'd lost more blood. She was pale and weak, struggling to keep food down. The baby, as far as Samuel could tell, was still viable, but the stress couldn't be good for the pregnancy. "I should go out there," Grace said weakly. "End this before anyone else gets hurt." No, Samuel's response was immediate and firm. That's what he wants. He wants you to sacrifice yourself to protect others. It's how he's controlled you for 3 years. But people will die if I don't. People might die if you do. Charlotte and her sisters, they'd never forgive themselves if they let him take you. And I'd never forgive myself for bringing you this far, just to lose you at the end. Grace's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so tired, Samuel. So tired of running. So tired of being afraid." "Then stop running. Stop being afraid. Stand and fight." "I don't know how." "Yes, you do. You've been fighting since the moment I met you. Fighting to stay alive, fighting to protect your baby, fighting to believe that escape was possible. That's all I'm asking you to do now. Keep fighting." The morning brought Deputy Walsh riding hard from Prescott with news that made a bad situation worse. Sheriff Donovan had issued a warrant for Samuel's arrest on charges of kidnapping. Judge Morrison had signed it, making it legally binding. "They're saying you abducted Mrs. Carver, that you're holding her against her will." Walsh explained, his young face grim. "It's all lies, but it's legal lies. If you don't surrender, they can claim you're a fugitive and use force to extract you." "Let them try," Charlotte said. "We're not giving up Grace, and we're not giving up the doctor." But Samuel could see the writing on the wall. Carver had done exactly what Grace predicted. He'd used the legal system as a weapon, turned law into a tool of oppression. Even if they successfully defended the ranch, Samuel would be branded a criminal. Grace would still be legally married to Carver. Nothing would be solved. Unless. The idea came to Samuel fully formed, audacious, and possibly insane. But desperate times called for desperate measures. "Grace," he said, "marry me." The room went silent. Grace stared at him, her eyes wide with shock. Charlotte and her sisters looked equally stunned. "What?" Grace finally managed. "Marry me right now. If you're my wife legally, Carver can't claim you. You'd be under my protection as your husband, not his. It wouldn't solve everything, but it would give us legal standing to fight him." "Samuel, you don't have to do this. You don't owe me a marriage. I'm not doing it out of obligation. I'm doing it because it's the right move tactically, and because I'd rather you be my wife than his, even if it's just on paper." Grace searched his face, looking for something. "Is it just on paper?" "Just a legal maneuver." Samuel considered lying, considered keeping his emotional distance. But he was tired of distance, tired of protecting himself from feelings. "I don't know what it is exactly," he admitted, "but I know I care about you. Know I want to protect you. Know I'd rather face whatever comes next with you than without you. That's not love, not yet, but it could be given time. And if I say yes, if we do this, what happens when the danger passes and you realize you've tied yourself to a broken woman with too much baggage? Then we deal with it together, like people do." Charlotte stepped forward. "Grace, you don't have to decide right now. We can fight without—" "Yes." Grace interrupted, her eyes still on Samuel. "Yes, I'll marry you." And the wedding took place in the ranch house parlor, with Deputy Walsh officiating, using his authority as a territorial official. It wasn't legal in the strictest sense. They'd need a proper ceremony later, but it was binding enough to cause legal complications for Carver's claim. Grace wore a simple dress borrowed from Ivy. Samuel stood beside her in his blood-stained shirt and dusty pants. There were no flowers, no music, no celebration. Just two people making vows to each other while armed men waited outside to kill them. "Do you, Samuel Garrett, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "Do you, Grace Brennan, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Grace's voice was steady. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Arizona, I pronounce you husband and wife." Samuel had nothing to give Grace as a wedding ring, but he had a simple gold band on a chain around his neck, the ring his wife had worn. He'd carried it for 15 years, unable to wear it himself, but unable to let it go. Now he took it off and held it out to Grace. "This was Elizabeth's," he said quietly. "I think she'd want you to have it, want you to be protected." Grace took the ring with trembling hands. Are you sure? I'm sure. She slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Outside, Harrison Carver was informed of the marriage by one of his scouts. His reaction was coldly furious. He rode to the ranch house gate and called out again. Very clever, doctor. Very clever indeed. But it changes nothing. That marriage isn't legal. It was performed under duress without proper licensing by an unqualified official. Any judge will annul it immediately. Maybe, Samuel called back, but it'll tie you up in court for months. And it gives Grace legal standing to file for divorce on grounds of cruelty and abuse. We have medical evidence. We have testimony from multiple witnesses. We have documentation of every injury you have inflicted on her. For the first time, Carver's composure cracked. You have nothing that will stand up in court. Nothing that can't be explained away. Then let's find out. Let's bring in Judge Blackwood from Tucson, the one judge in the territory you don't own. Let's have a public hearing and see which story people believe. The rich rancher protecting his confused wife, or the abused woman finally finding the courage to speak the truth. The standoff continued through the day. Carver's men maintained their positions, but they didn't attack. Inside the ranch house, tension built like storm pressure. Grace rested as much as she could, but Samuel could see the stress taking its toll. She was pale, withdrawing her hand constantly on her stomach, as if she could protect the baby through sheer will. It was late afternoon when everything changed. A rider appeared from the south, moving fast. He wore a badge, but not a deputy's badge, a marshal's badge. And behind him came more riders. Federal marshals, a dozen of them. The lead marshal rode directly to Carver, ignoring the private army surrounding him. Harrison Carver, I am. You're under arrest for fraud, extortion, and suspected involvement in the murder of your first wife, Margaret Carver. The shock was palpable. Carver's face went white, then red. On whose authority? From federal authority. We've been investigating you for 6 months. Your business dealings, your political connections, your methods of acquiring land and eliminating competition. The marshal's smile was cold. Turns out you made a lot of enemies over the years, Mr. Carver. People who were too scared to talk before. But when we started asking questions, officially offering protection, they couldn't talk fast enough. This is ridiculous. I have rights. I want my lawyer. You'll get one. In federal custody, awaiting trial in Tucson. The marshal gestured to his men. Take him. As Carver was being arrested, his men scattered. Without their leader and facing federal marshals, they had no stomach for a fight. Within minutes, the siege was over. Inside the ranch house, Grace collapsed. The stress, the blood loss, the pregnancy, all of it finally overwhelming her system. Samuel caught her as she fell, feeling her body go limp in his arms. Grace, Grace, stay with me. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused. The baby. Samuel pressed his hand to her stomach, feeling for movement. There, a flutter weak but present. The baby's alive, but you need to rest. Real rest for days. Grace's hand found his. Did it work? Are we free? We're free. She smiled, a real smile, the first he'd seen from her. Then her eyes closed and she slipped into unconscious. Samuel carried her to a bedroom and began the work of ensuring she and the baby survived. It was touch and go for 2 days. Grace developed a fever from the infection that had finally set in. She drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid, sometimes delirious. Samuel never left her side, monitoring her, constantly adjusting treatments, willing her to fight. On the 3rd day, the fever broke. Grace opened her eyes clear and focused for the first time since the wedding. Samuel, I'm here. The baby. Still alive, still fighting just like you. She reached for his hand. We did it. We actually did it. We did. What happens now? Samuel considered the question. Carver was in federal custody facing charges that would likely see him hanged. The marriage, irregular as it was, could be formalized properly. Grace could file for divorce or annulment from Carver based on abuse and fraud. The path forward was clearer than it had been in days, but that wasn't what Grace was really asking. Now we figure out what we are to each other, Samuel said. We made vows under pressure, out of necessity, but we made them. We have to decide if they mean something beyond survival. Do they mean something to you? Samuel thought about the past week, about finding Grace bleeding in the desert, about choosing to help her despite the danger, about the conversations in the dark, the moments of trust, the gradual realization that he cared whether she lived or died. Yes, he said simply, they mean something. I don't know what exactly, don't know if it's love or just the beginning of love, but it's real. It matters. To me too, Grace whispered. I'm scared, Samuel. Scared of trusting someone, scared of being vulnerable. But I want to try, want to see if we can make this real instead of just necessary. Then we try, one day at a time. No expectations, no pressure. Just see where it goes. Grace smiled, and this time the smile reached her eyes. One day at a time. I think I can do that. The weeks that followed brought healing and change. Grace's wound closed cleanly, leaving a scar she'd carry for the rest of her life. The baby grew stronger, more active. Samuel set up a small practice at the Triple B treating ranch hands and local residents, while Grace regained her strength. Deputy Walsh brought news from Prescott regularly. Carver's trial was proceeding, the evidence against him overwhelming. His empire was crumbling, his business partners abandoning him, his political allies suddenly unable to remember his name. Justice, it seemed, had finally caught up with Harrison Carver. 4 months after the siege, Samuel and Grace were married again properly, this time in a church in Prescott, with Grace's sisters in attendance. She wore a dress of ivory silk, her belly round with pregnancy. Samuel wore his best suit and the expression of a man who'd found something he thought he'd lost forever. The baby came in late spring, a healthy girl with her mother's green eyes and a cry that could wake the dead. They named her Sarah after Samuel's first daughter, with Grace's full blessing. She would have wanted this, Grace said, holding the baby, while Samuel looked on with wonder. You're Elizabeth. She would have wanted you to have a family again. I think you're right. Life settled into a rhythm. Samuel practiced medicine, Grace helped run the Triple B. Sarah grew bigger and louder every day. They had arguments, moments of friction, as two damaged people learned to live together. But they also had laughter, tenderness, moments of connection that grew deeper with time. News came from Tucson. Harrison Carver had been convicted and sentenced to hang. The execution was scheduled for autumn. Do you want to be there? Samuel asked Grace. To see it through. She considered the question, one hand absently stroking Sarah's dark hair. No, that part of my life is over. I don't need to watch him die to know I'm free. I just need this life we're building. 5 years passed. The Triple B prospered under the management of the four Brennan sisters and their expanding families. Charlotte married Deputy Walsh, who became the new sheriff of Prescott. Harper found love with a traveling merchant, while Ivy married one of the ranch hands their father had trained. Samuel's practice grew until he was the most respected doctor in 3 counties. He trained assistants, taught medical techniques, saved lives daily. But his most important patient was always Grace, whom he monitored through 2 more pregnancies, both successful. Twin boys born 3 years after Sarah completing their family. Grace bloomed in freedom. The frightened, broken woman Samuel had found in the desert was gone, replaced by someone stronger. She ran the ranch's business affairs, negotiated cattle sales, commanded respect from everyone she dealt with. The scars remained physical and emotional, but they no longer defined her. On a warm autumn evening, 5 years after that desperate flight through the mountains, Samuel and Grace sat on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard. Sarah was teaching her younger brothers to rope fence posts, her voice full of patient authority. Do you ever regret it? Grace asked, her hand finding Samuel's. Marrying me, taking on all my problems. Samuel pulled her close, breathing in the scent of sage and soap that he'd come to associate with home. Regret finding a reason to live again. Regret having a family. Regret being happy for the first time in 15 years. He smiled. Not even for a second. I love you, Samuel Garrett. I love you too, Grace Garrett. More than I thought possible. The sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out its voice, lonely but not afraid. The desert night settled over the land, bringing with it the promise of another day ahead. And in that moment, sitting on the porch with his wife and watching his children play, Samuel Garrett felt something he hadn't felt in 2 decades. He felt complete, whole, home. The journey from that desperate night in the canyon had been long and dangerous. They'd lost blood, lost sleep, lost any illusions about safety or certainty. But they'd gained something infinitely more valuable. They'd found each other. found family, found a future worth fighting for. Grace leaned her head on Samuel's shoulder, comfortable in his presence, in a way that would have been unimaginable 6 years ago. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For seeing me when I couldn't see myself, for believing I was worth saving when I'd stopped believing it. You saved yourself, Grace. I just gave you a safe place to do it." "We saved each other." Samuel couldn't argue with that. They had saved each other, two broken people who'd found a way to be whole together. It wasn't the life either of them had planned. It was better. The stars began to emerge overhead, cold and distant and beautiful. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The ranch to run, patience to treat, children to raise. But they would face it together as they'd faced everything since that night in the desert. The years that followed proved that happiness once found had a way of multiplying. Samuel's medical practice became legendary throughout Arizona territory. He trained 3 young doctors who went on to establish their own practices in neighboring counties. His innovative techniques for treating gunshot wounds and infections were written up in medical journals back east. But his greatest pride was always Grace. She transformed the Triple B into the most profitable ranch in 3 territories, implementing modern breeding techniques and fair labor practices that other ranchers studied and copied. When the territorial legislature finally allowed women to own property in their own names, Grace was the first to register the Triple B solely under her name. Charlotte and Tom Walsh had 4 children and raised them to believe in justice over convenience. Harper's merchant husband brought new trade routes to Arizona, making the Brennan family even more prosperous. Ivy became the territory's foremost horse trainer, her animals sought after from California to Texas. Harrison Carver was hanged in Tucson on October 15, 1879, just over a year after his arrest. Samuel and Grace did not attend. They were too busy building their new life, refusing to let that man occupy even one more moment of their time. 15 years after that desperate night in Red Rock Canyon, Samuel stood in the same spot where he'd found Grace bleeding in the desert. He'd ridden out alone, needing to see it one more time. The blood was long gone, washed away by rain and wind. The boulder where she'd collapsed looked smaller than he remembered. He thought about the man he'd been then, isolated, hollow, waiting to die without admitting it. And he thought about the man he was now, a husband, a father to 5 children, a doctor who'd saved hundreds of lives because one woman had given him a reason to care again. The sound of hoofbeats made him turn. Grace rode up on her favorite mare, her hair showing threads of silver, now a smile on her face that still took his breath away even after 15 years together. "I thought I'd find you here," she said, dismounting, feeling nostalgic, just remembering. Good memories are bad. Samuel looked at the desert, harsh and beautiful and indifferent. Both, mostly, grateful. Grace moved to stand beside him, her hand finding his naturally. "Do you know what day it is?" "Thursday." She laughed. "It's the anniversary. 15 years ago today you found me here, saved my life." Samuel turned to face her, seeing not the broken woman from that night, but the formidable, magnificent person she'd become. "You saved mine too. You know that, right?" "I know." Grace reached up to touch his face, the gesture still making his heart skip. "Want to know a secret?" "Always." "I'm pregnant again." Samuel's eyes widened. "Grace, we have 5 children already. You're 42 years old. Are you sure this is—" She silenced him with a kiss. "I'm sure. And before you start your doctor lecture, yes, I've been taking care of myself. Yes, I know the risks. And yes, I want this baby. Our last one." Samuel pulled her close, breathing her in. After 15 years, he still sometimes woke in the night, afraid this was all a dream. That he'd wake up alone in that canyon outpost, that Grace and the children and the life they'd built were just fever visions. But Grace was solid and real in his arms. Their children were waiting at home. The future stretched ahead, uncertain as always, but faced together. "I love you," he said simply. "I love you too. Now come on, old man. We have 5 children who are probably destroying the house while we're out here being romantic." They rode home together as the sun set, 2 people who'd found each other in the darkest moment and built something bright enough to last lifetimes. Behind them, a Red Rock Canyon stood silent and eternal, keeping its secrets. The desert had taught them both about survival, but they'd taught each other about living, and that made all the difference. So tell me, partner, if you were in Samuel's position that night, Would you have risked everything for a stranger? Or would you have played it safe, turned her away, protected yourself from the danger? Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is let someone else's pain matter to us. Sometimes the strongest choice is to care when it would be easier not to. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. And if this story touched something in you, if you've ever been broken and found the strength to heal, or if you've ever chosen courage over safety, hit that subscribe button. Because everyone deserves a second chance at home. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.